Footsteps sounded in the hallway. They went clack-clack as someone walked by. He could mostly hear his own footsteps and the sound of his ball bouncing. Maybe he heard the new woman watching him yawn. His regular caretaker was gone, and he had someone new helping him. The footsteps got closer. It was someone very old. His caretaker stood up and stepped forward to protect him. She spoke politely to the old man, but he didn't notice and kept walking slowly toward the boy. His white hair was messy, and his eyes were deep set, but his hand didn't have many wrinkles, which meant he wasn't as old as he looked. A woman came into the room, maybe because she heard the person watching over him call out. It was his mother. She walked quickly and stood between him and the other man, looking him straight in the eye. The man let out a sad cry. He seemed to be afraid of the boy's mother. Seeing how the man's body moved, the boy threw his ball down and held tightly to his mother. The old man still tried to come closer. He seemed to want to tell them something. His hand was closed in a tight fist and he was holding something. The boy's mother used a big fan to keep the man away. She looked at him with a strong, fiery glare, not the usual peaceful look in her eyes. The man was scared of the fire, like a frightened animal, and he stood very still. Soon, other men came in from the hallway. They had short, thin beards, and the boy knew they were called eunuchs. After them, an old woman walked in, looking very peaceful. She wore a fancy hair stick that made a ringing sound like a bell. When they heard it, the people waiting nearby quickly stood in a straight line. The boy's helper and his mom both got down on their knees. He figured he should kneel down too. The woman looked older than the old man, but her eyes were bright and strong. Her gaze felt very direct, and the boy shivered. He thought he had seen her before. He remembered that she was someone important, and the young ladies who served her said nobody dared to disagree with her. The old woman touched the old man. "Come on now, back to your room." Her voice was kind and calm, but the man was still scared and moved closer to the wall. He curled up into a ball, and the boy could hear his teeth shaking. He could tell the man's whole body was trembling. A shiny object fell from the man's hand, and the boy looked at it even though he was trying not to. It was a colourful stone, a bright mix of red and yellow. He had seen it before somewhere. What was it? The bright colour felt familiar, but he couldn't quite remember. The old woman frowned and turned away from the man, not paying attention to anyone else in the room. The palace workers gently encouraged the emperor to come back outside, talking to him until he followed them. The boy watched everything carefully, staying close to the person taking care of him. He didn't understand what was happening, he just felt scared. Then he looked at his mother. She was kneeling next to him and stared angrily at the woman who was leaving. Who were the old man and woman, the boy thought, to make his usually calm mother look so upset? He would find out later. The man was his father, he learned, and the old woman was his grandmother. The man he thought was his father was actually his older brother. It wasn't summer yet, but Jinchi woke up with his sheets all wet from sweat. He sat up in bed, feeling sick, and reached for the pitcher on the table, quickly drinking from it. The water tasted good because it had a little fruit juice and honey mixed in, which felt good for his dry throat. He could see moonlight shining through the window. People said something unlucky often happened after a bad dream. Jinchi wondered if it was just an old belief. He took a deep breath and set the water down on the table. It was still many hours before the sun would rise. He should try to go back to sleep, or his helper Gaeshun would be annoyed with him. But sometimes, when you can't sleep, you just can't sleep. It wasn't worth trying to make it happen. When someone couldn't fall asleep, a good way to get tired was to do something active. Jinchi grabbed a practice sword from a shelf. It wasn't very sharp and was made to be shorter and heavier than a regular sword, perfect for training. He swung his sword in a big arc with one hand. He wanted to practice outside, but his guards might get annoyed if they saw him. They might still notice him practicing inside his room, but at least they might decide it was okay if he stayed inside. His room wasn't really a great place to practice with a sword, though. He came up with a plan. He would do the whole dance on one foot. After finishing it once, he would switch to the other foot and hands and do it again. He kept doing this over and over until it started to get bright outside. Jinchi then lay flat on the ground to cool down because he was warmed up from all the exercise. He wondered if he could have a bath, but then he remembered one of the palace ladies. She often looked annoyed when he bathed early and used a lot of perfume afterward. He couldn't go to work smelling so sweaty. If he wanted to seem perfect as Jinchi, he needed to smell good. It was frustrating because he couldn't simply tell her that was why. He also knew he couldn't keep quiet about it forever. The woman was very clever, so she probably guessed something was happening. Maybe she already knew the truth but was acting like she didn't. Jinchi thought it would make talking much simpler. He stood up, returned the practice sword to its holder, and then fell back onto his bed. He didn't even bother changing his clothes. He had a little bit of time before Suhyun, his helper, came to wake him up. He could at least rest for a little while before then. He just needed to be careful not to yawn at work, he thought to himself. Chapter 1 Books. What are you doing? Asked Jinchi, a court official who always looked very handsome. He seemed very confused. Gaeshun stood behind him. It seems pretty clear, Maomao said, wiping sweat from her face as she stood near the hot cook stove. The doctor stood beside her, fanning himself with his hand and looking a little uncomfortable in the heat. He worked very hard, and Maomao needed help with her leg still getting better. She thought his movements were a little soft, but maybe she expected too much. They were using the cookstove in the medical office to heat a very strange stew. A long pipe came out of the top of the pot. It went through some cool water, and little drops of water formed at the end. These drops fell into a small bowl. This special tool was something they found while cleaning recently. Maomao felt sad that something so special had been forgotten in the storage room for a long time. The air smelled like flowers, and the pot was full of petals. We are making perfume, Maomao explained. She had a great supply of petals from the roses she grew for the garden party. It smells really nice. The smell isn't very strong compared to roses that grow in the wild, and we will make it even lighter by mixing it with oil and water. Over many years, people have chosen roses that look beautiful and have bright colors, even if they don't smell as strong. It was just how things were. You couldn't always get everything you wanted, or you might end up with nothing at all. Jinchi looked at the person making the drink with interest. When the doctor who had been carrying wood noticed Jinchi was there, he quickly brushed the dust off his clothes like a young girl trying to look neat. He touched his moustache and beard with his fingers and asked, "What brings you here, sir?" Jinchi's face became serious. Maomao didn't think the doctor meant to be rude, but Jinchi didn't like how he asked the question. "You can't miss a smell this strong," he said, looking a little sad. Gaeshun nearby looked worried. Maomao thought he believed Jinchi needed to seem more important. The doctor didn't really notice much of anything, so it didn't matter too much, but important people always needed to look dignified. Maomao stood up, took some tasty snacks from a shelf she knew the doctor kept his best treats on, and put them on the table. Jinchi sat down. Maomao took a mooncake, bit into it to show it was safe to eat, and then gave them to him. "You're doing this here because it would be harder at the Jade Pavilion, right?" Jinchi asked. "Yes, that's one reason." Maomao wiped her greasy fingers and went back to the cookstove. She switched the container at the end of the tube to a new one. Soon, a thick liquid started to flow into it, perfume oil. This perfume oil has something inside it that might stop a pregnancy from continuing. As long as a woman doesn't use too much of the perfume, she should be okay, but still she looked around to make sure the doctor wasn't too close. He was a very nice man, but he talked a lot. It was too early to tell him that the most important woman in the Jade Pavilion, Consort Jaikayu, was going to have a baby. "So you're saying there's no need to change the perfume oil used in the palace, right?" "Yes, sir, I think it will be fine." Making rules about everything would just make things more difficult. It would also be hard to make sure everyone followed the rules in such a big place. Jinchi looked at the other pot on the stove. It didn't smell as nice as the one with rose petals. Actually, breathing the steam from this pot made his head feel dizzy. "What is this?" he asked. "That's alcohol," Maomao said. It was made very strong by repeating the process of making it. It was so strong that Jinchi felt a little dizzy just from smelling it. They weren't going to drink it but use it to kill germs. The warm weather was almost here, and sometimes the air could get stuffy and make people feel unwell. With a young princess staying at the Jade Pavilion, everyone wanted to keep things as clean as they could. Maomao was making a little extra of her special cleaning stuff so she could leave some at the medical office where it would be used a lot. Can you use this to clean things? Jinchi asked. Yes, I heard that's what people do in the Western lands. She learned this from listening to stories about her adoptive father's time studying in those places. If there was one thing that made her special, Maomao believed, it was what she had learned from him. As I remember, the man who took you in was, but Jinchi didn't get to finish his thought. They heard a loud noise. Gaeshun looked outside to see what had happened. 2 palace servants arrived at the doctor's office carrying a large box and placed it near the door. What is in the box? Gaeshun asked the doctor. The young lady asked for it to be brought here, the doctor replied. Maomao frowned at the doctor, hoping he would be quiet, but it was too late. Jinchi was already opening the package and looking inside. She hoped he would ask before touching things. Master Jinchi, the tea is ready. Please sit down and drink it, she said. What is this? He asked. It's just a gift from my family. Nothing interesting, I promise you. But Jinchi looked very interested. Maomao thought, I can't believe this guy. She was a woman. She wished he wouldn't look so closely at a time like this. Instead, she looked down and said, it's full of clothes, sir. Jinchi quickly took his hand away, looking a little surprised. Maomao wished he would just leave it alone, but things didn't always go as planned. How much laundry is in there that it took 2 men to carry it? Gaeshun asked. He always noticed little details. He's right, Jinchi said, and suddenly everyone saw what Maomao had brought. Maomao said that's just how things are in the rear palace. The ladies who lived in the rear palace were all young and hoped the emperor would choose them to be his wife. Not everyone acted this way, but most people did. Let's say the emperor chose a young woman. She would not only be a little scared to be with the emperor, she would also be trying new things with him. Think about how worried a young woman would be if she made a mistake while with him. I think they should learn the most important things first. So that's why you got all of this. Jinchi stood proudly in front of Maomao, who was sitting up straight on the floor. It felt like this had happened before. The box was open and lots of books were inside. What kind of books? Well, the sort that Maomao had been getting for the emperor to help him feel better when he was sad at night. Consort Lihua also enjoyed reading them. This time Maomao got more books than usual, hoping to sell some to different people, but they arrived at a bad time. She had them delivered to the medical office to avoid Hongniang, who was very particular, but now look what happened. Maomao wasn't greedy, but she needed to earn a little money so her father back in the pleasure district would have enough to eat. He was a kind man, her father, and she thought the head of the house would probably ask him to work a lot. Jinchi looked annoyed, but he also thought Maomao was right. When she said the emperor himself had asked for this, Jinchi looked confused, but he knew she was probably correct. Gaeshun was reading one of the books very carefully. The whole scene felt strange, and Maomao found herself frowning at it. This is very well made, Gaeshun said. He was admiring how it was made, Maomao thought. She had wondered if Gaeshun was just looking at it with interest, but it seemed he noticed more than that. They used nice paper, she said. Books about romance were popular, and they were often given to young women when they got married. People who enjoyed reading them were happy to spend money on them. These books had lots of pictures, so you didn't have to be a strong reader to enjoy them. Even though they cost money to make, they could also make a lot of money back. Jinchi was looking at the pictures and thought what they showed was pretty funny. The doctor looked a little embarrassed and kept glancing around. He said they weren't printed with wood blocks but with metal plates. That's amazing, Jinchi said. It was a way of printing that people used in the West. Maomao didn't know a lot about how the books were made, but if Jinchi thought they were good, they must be special. Now that I have some really good materials, I wanted more people to be able to read them, Maomao said. That's something else, Jinchi replied. He kept looking at the book, carefully reading what was inside. Maomao wasn't sure she wanted him to study it too closely, so she started to look at him with a doubtful expression. Maybe Gaeshun saw this because he lightly touched Jinchi's arm. If you like it, sir, why don't you take one for yourself? Maomao asked. No, it didn't really interest me, Jinchi said, almost dropping the book. Maomao carefully picked it up and flattened it so the pages wouldn't wrinkle. No, Jinchi said, sounding more sure of himself this time, but maybe I can let it go just this once. He suddenly sounded very proud, but he was an important person, so that made sense. Are you sure, sir? Maomao asked with a little sparkle in her eyes. Yes, he said, but I want you to tell me which shop is selling these. Maomao's face quickly showed she was trying not to smile. Gaeshun gave Jinchi another little push. What? Jinchi asked, sounding a little embarrassed. I just want to know more about this beautiful printing, he said. This conversation was getting a little weird. Of course, Maomao replied, still smiling as she wrote the shop's name in her notebook. It's true. Yes, sir. She thought Jinchi didn't even need pictures to understand. Someone as clever as him could easily see everything for himself. Could paper sometimes be better than what really happens? Maomao thought about this as she carefully tore a page from her notebook and gave it to him. She noticed the doctor's notebook had really nice paper, which wasn't surprising. Maomao thought maybe Jinchi was planning to start a new business. The clever part of running a country was finding ways to collect taxes from the people without making them too angry. One way to do this was to help people earn more money, and the first step was to use the tax money wisely. Maomao wasn't sure exactly how he would do it, she thought, but the most important thing right now was to gather up the books that had fallen. Jinchi was gathering his usual crowd, and it might have been funny to see what they would think if they knew what the handsome eunuch was reading, but Maomao wasn't mean enough to tell them. While Maomao was cleaning, Gaeshun's hand touched the box the delivery came in. Is something wrong? Maomao asked. Gaeshun looked unsure. I was thinking if any of the stories needed to be changed a little bit. He was talking about what was in the stories. Some of them were pretty intense, actually. The Emperor liked them that way. He really did like them. I heard our most important reader didn't think the first stories were exciting enough. Not at all, Gaeshun said. And after she convinced the woman in charge to choose the nicest fabric, she gave him the brightest and most colourful piece. About 10 days later, Maomao was relaxing near where the clothes were washed. I wonder what's hidden down there, Xiaolan said, leaning against a wall with a basket of laundry. It was a beautiful day, so the laundry area was very busy. Men who couldn't grow beards washed clothes very quickly as soon as water arrived. The maids' clothes were cleaned by people stepping on them in a strong soapy mixture, while the clothes of the Emperor's favourite women were washed gently by hand with soap made at home. Look at me, Maomao said. She gave a baked treat wrapped in a bamboo leaf to Xiaolan, who smiled and took it. Maomao realised the question about what was buried down there came from a storybook. Stories were very popular in the Emperor's palace. What am I looking for under these beautiful flowers? Xiaolan asked, her eyes shining. She came from the countryside and didn't know how to read, so someone must have been reading the story to her. I wonder what it could be, she said while chewing her food. Her cheeks puffed out like a squirrel's. Maybe it's something yucky, Maomao guessed, and Xiaolan snorted. The girl almost choked, but she glared at Maomao and her eyes started to water. Maomao got some water and helped Xiaolan drink it, rubbing her back gently. You shouldn't eat so quickly, it's your fault. What Maomao said was probably true. To grow healthy vegetables, you need more than just water. If the soil isn't strong, the vegetables won't be either, and that's where fertilizer helps. It's the same with pretty flowers. The more beautiful they are, the more fertilizer they probably needed. But a girl who loves a good story might not want to think about those details. Maomao decided to be more careful from now on. Soon it was her turn to wash the clothes. The stories Xiaolan loved were popular throughout the palace, and everyone in the Jade Pavilion was reading them. When Maomao returned, she found 3 young women talking and laughing over a simple book. Hello, Maomao, said Gyuan, who was usually quiet and gentle. Yinghua and Ailan were so interested in the book they didn't notice her right away. Gyuan was holding the page, and the other 2 were gently pulling her arm, eager for her to turn the page. Maomao bent down to look at the book's cover. It showed a tree full of flowers and a person standing under it. She guessed this was the book Xiaolan had mentioned. Do you want to read it later, Maomao? Gyuan read faster than the others, and she had a moment to chat. No, thank you. Why does everyone like that book so much? Maomao asked. It was a gift from the Emperor. It's really good, actually. The Emperor himself had chosen it. It was surprising because people who thought they were fancy often didn't think novels were good enough for them. They believed that learning about real things was better than reading stories. It seems he gave them to all the noble ladies and told them to pass them on after they finished reading, Gyuan said, though she seemed a little sad that Consort Jayukayu wasn't the only one who got this special present. Interesting, Maomao said, looking carefully at the book's cover. She knew she had seen that mark before. It was the sign from the bookstore she told Jinchi about recently. Now she understood why he was so curious about what she was studying. Jinchi looked at the paper and thought it was good enough for a gift from the emperor. If the books were given to all the emperor's wives, then many books must have been made, at least 100. If they could make more copies of the books, even more could be printed. Then, if they printed a popular version on paper that wasn't quite as expensive, they could make even more money. Maomao was beginning to think she should have asked the printer for a small payment for helping. She was sure Jinchi must have suggested the idea to the emperor. I should have known he was planning something. Simple storybooks were given to the royal wives. Usually any gift from the king would be loved and kept safe, but by giving books to all of them, each one felt less special. And really, the gift wasn't very good literature at all.